Fred Hampton was a civil rights leader active in Chicago in the mid to late 1960s who fought passionately to break down racial divides in the movement for increased freedom and equality. Hampton would eventually be killed by the Chicago Police Department, likely after being drugged by an FBI informant connected to the illegal COINTELPRO program, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. While teaching about Hampton, we can't separate him from his place and time in the world. As a civil rights activist and chair of the Illinois Black Panther Party, Hampton was fighting for racial and class inequality during the Vietnam War, the assassination of Malcolm X, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., as well as during the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1968. It is important for students to understand the chaos of the late 60s before they can understand Fred Hampton. Hampton started his activism in high school, leading walkout protests. After graduating high school, he took pre-law classes at a junior college near Chicago and started working for the NAACP. Around this time, Hampton began identifying with the worldwide class struggle and started reading works by communist thinkers. Hampton then moved into downtown Chicago and joined the newly founded branch of the Black Panther Party there. Rising quickly through the ranks of the organization, Hampton was instrumental in some of the Black Panthers' greatest successes in Chicago. Hampton brokered peace between some of Chicago's most violent street gangs, launched the Chicago branch of the Breakfast for Children program, started by Panthers in the Bay Area, and organized the formation of something called the Rainbow Coalition. The Rainbow Coalition was the result of Hampton's vision, incredible speaking skills, and knack for bringing folks together. The heart of the Rainbow Coalition was the union between the Black Panther Party, the Young Patriots, and the Young Lords. The Young Patriots were a group of disaffected Southern whites who moved north during the Great Migration. Not obvious allies for the Black Panthers, the Young Patriots would often hang Confederate flags at their meetings. The Young Lords were a Latino group born out of a street gang that became a potent civil rights advocacy group. Hampton brought these three disparate people together with the common interest of fighting against the establishment and for the working class and oppressed people of Chicago. As we will discuss more in a second, the FBI was keeping watch for a messiah who might unite the Black liberation movement into a cohesive unit which could effectively push for revolution. Given Hampton's ability to reunite the Rainbow Coalition, he found himself on the list of individuals the FBI was watching. We can't teach about Fred Hampton without teaching about the Black Panther Party. The Black Panthers are often reduced to being a violent group, a criminal group, or compared negatively to groups like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee or the nonviolent activism of Martin Luther King Jr. This is frankly a false characterization of both the Black Panthers and other civil rights groups. It has entered the public conversation in recent years how much the legacy of Martin Luther King has been whitewashed to remove his radical activism, but the distortion of the Black Panthers image is less discussed. This image of the Panthers was actually explicitly part of the FBI's counterintelligence measures against the group to make them less palatable and drive down their enrollment. When teaching about Fred Hampton and the Panthers more generally, it is important to acknowledge that they did not ascribe to nonviolence, but that they should be best known for their social services they provided to their community, like breakfast programs for school children, medical care, protection, and fundraising. Allow students to use the documents in these lessons to grapple with the legacy of the Panthers and overcome common misconceptions. These lessons attempt to center the life and work of Fred Hampton, as opposed to focusing solely on the way he died, which tends to be the most remembered part of his story. That being said, the way Fred Hampton died is vital to understanding his fight for civil rights and the obstacles he was facing. In the mid-1950s, the FBI started a secret and illegal program called the Counterintelligence Program, or COINTELPRO for short. It began with the goal of rooting out communists and destabilizing any nascent communist movements in the United States. The program expanded through the 60s to include Vietnam War protesters and civil rights activists, among other perceived enemies of the establishment status quo. The program was headed by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, for which he has been largely reviled in recent years. The buck did not always stop with Hoover, however. Then U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy personally signed orders to wiretap Martin Luther King Jr. As the civil rights movement made progress in the 1960s, COINTELPRO used confidential informants, fake letters to major figures, wiretaps, and violence to stoke conflict inside civil rights groups like the Black Panthers and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The most well-known of these actions taken by the FBI was taping Martin Luther King Jr. having extramarital affairs and blackmailing him with these tapes. Specifically, the FBI was trying to convince MLK to commit suicide, or else they would release the tapes to the public, discrediting him with his base. The FBI also sent fake letters between members of the Nation of Islam and other black liberation groups, claiming that each was going to attack the other. These counterintelligence efforts were often successful in creating rifts in the civil rights community, and many point to the FBI's disinformation campaign as a driving factor in the killing of Malcolm X. In Chicago, the FBI was concerned that Fred Hampton was this messiah figure they were concerned about, and placed a confidential informant inside the Black Panther Party to report on Hampton's activities. In December 1969, the Chicago Police Department went to Hampton's residence to execute a search warrant for illegal guns. The CPD was supported by the FBI and were given a floor plan drawn by the FBI's confidential informant, which specifically marked the bed Fred Hampton would be sleeping in. The raid almost immediately became an out-of-control shootout that police would claim was caused by occupants of the house firing repeatedly at the police. Physical evidence, however, supports that only one shot was fired by the occupants of the house, as police breached the front door, while somewhere between 70 to 100 shots were fired by police during the raid. Hampton was killed lying face down in his bed during the raid. There are conflicting reports of exactly what happened during the raid, though it is clear from physical evidence that police accounts of the raid cannot be trusted. One resident of the house said he heard police officers confirm that Hampton was alive, then heard 2 gunshots in confirmation that Hampton was now certainly dead. There is also strong evidence that Hampton had been drugged prior to the raid, likely by the FBI informant, to ensure that he could not fight back or escape. Despite hundreds of bullets being fired inside the house, Hampton never woke up or got out of his bed. A friend in the room with him attempted to wake Hampton when the raid started, but was unsuccessful. An initial autopsy found a huge dose of sedative in Hampton's system, though a later report contradicted this finding. The typical categorization of the raid by historians and activists is that Hampton was assassinated by the Chicago Police Department with assistance from the FBI through COINTELPRO. This can be very difficult history for your students to learn. It does not fit with our common conception of our nation's character and history that the government was destabilizing civil rights movements and going as far to murder a man who was uniting racially diverse coalitions in Chicago. If you have emotions while learning this material, as I certainly did, share them with your students. Normalize sharing emotions in your classroom, and acknowledge that it is normal to have complicated feelings when learning difficult history. The murder of Fred Hampton is tempting to focus on because of its drastic nature and the important facts it reveals about our government. But truly, my goal in these lessons is to center the incredible work done by Fred Hampton before his death. If all we remember about Fred Hampton is how he died, the FBI's goal will be accomplished.